In this video, I'm going to show you how to calculate your real battery return on investment so you know if it's worthwhile buying one for your home or business. G'day everybody, Daniel here from GI Energy. Today we're talking about real battery savings and explaining how to calculate your ROI. I'm going to run through exactly what we're going to do in this video, and then we're going to do each section and we'll make some chapters so you can skip through to the parts that are more relevant to your situation. So firstly, we're going to go through what is an ROI, what does it mean? Then we're going to go through why that matters, why does an ROI matter? Then we're going to go through the factors that can change an ROI. Then we're going to go through what you can do to stuff it up basically along the way. And then we're going to go through the formula for ROI calculations if you've already got solar installed, and then ROI calculations if you've got no solar installed and you're looking to do solar and battery together. And then finally, we're going to go through VPPs. So if you're putting a virtual power plant in place and you're joining one of those to get extra battery savings, we'll explain there how you can try and calculate that additional benefit. So first of all, what is an ROI? Well, ROI is a return on investment. It just means when you recoup your money that you've outlaid for a product or service. ROI can be calculated differently. We're just going to do it in broad terms today. So basically how much money you spend, how you can calculate your savings, and then how quickly you'll get that money back. Some people will factor in other things into their battery ROI, like backup. It might be that you really value having backup power for your home, so that you want to factor that into your ROI. Obviously, then it's a bit more difficult to quantify in the terms of a factual calculated payback period. But if you say you've calculated, you think you're going to get an ROI of about 5 years, and you're going to get a lot of benefit along the way from backup protection, then that might make it a much more attractive proposition than just a classic 5-year return on investment with no other benefits. Similarly, a lot of people really value having their own little mini power station at home. I know for me personally, having my battery there, looking at the app, knowing that I'm self-sufficient most of the time, that's a really nice feeling. And that for me adds into my personal return on investment. Again, it's not a financial aspect, but it definitely adds to the overall benefit for me. So that's what an ROI is. Obviously, today we're going to run through the calculations for the practical, quantifiable return on investment and payback periods and how you can calculate those. That's what an ROI is. Why does it matter? Well, a solar system with or without a battery, and a battery added onto a solar system is obviously an investment. It's an investment of your time, looking into it, researching, being there for the install, all those sorts of things, and it's an investment of your money. So the return on investment is important because you want to know when you're going to see that return, when you're going to get that money back, basically. It matters more to some people than others. Some people are not overly concerned by a really fast payback. A lot of people are environmentally influenced and motivated, so they like to see that they're doing the right thing by the environment. But I think for everybody, there's a reason for buying a battery, and that return on investment, no matter how you weigh it up, is important to everybody for different reasons. You can stuff up your ROI by getting the calculations right and knowing that you've got approximately an X amount of time to pay your battery back, but then doing it wrong. So if you install a battery that's very cheap, it may or may not last. If it's installed incorrectly, it may or may not last. And both of those things may mean that you don't have warranty coverage. So you could do the best battery in the world and it could be installed incorrectly, and it may not then meet the guidelines to claim a warranty if something happens along the way. Similarly, you can install a product where the manufacturer isn't able to support warranties for whatever reason. So you've got to be really careful what you install. Here in Australia, with battery rebates and solar panel rebates and a fantastic climate, we've got a really good opportunity to get a genuinely fantastic return on investment on solar and battery installs. You don't have to go and try and cut corners to try and make it better. You're going to get such a fast payback here when you're comparing to basically anywhere else in the world. The advice that I guess I'm trying to get across is, if you're going to do it, do your due diligence, make sure you're comfortable with the products and the people that are installing it for you, and then do it right and do it once. You only get to claim the battery rebate once, meaning if you install a battery and it does break down and you need to replace it and it's not under warranty, you're going to pay the full cost of that battery the second time around. So the rebate you can only claim once per property. So really think about that and get that decision right before you install anything, and then you won't stuff up your ROI. You've got a great opportunity, as I said, here in Australia with generous rebates and a fantastic climate to get a really fast payback. Please don't cut corners, whether that's with us or with anybody else in the industry. Just do your due diligence and make sure that you're going to do it right. So let's have a look at what factors can affect your ROI. It's important to know this before you try and calculate it yourself. So the big one, I guess, is your energy tariffs. Everybody's on a slightly different tariff. If you're moving into the business tariffs, then they can change even more wildly. But depending on where you are in Australia and which tariff you're on, your rates could be anything from, as the time of recording, as low as on a peak tariff, 26 cents plus GST. I've seen them as low as recently. And then I've also seen them at 50 cents plus GST. So that's obviously nearly double. So that's going to have a big impact. It's not just the peak rate either. Some people are on time of use tariffs. So you may have a peak and a shoulder rate. You may also have a peak, a shoulder, and an off-peak rate, and they'll all have different cents per kilowatt values allocated to them. So obviously knowing your tariff makes a big difference. If you're paying 50 cents versus 26, typically you're going to get a faster payback on that higher tariff because obviously you're saving more money per kilowatt hour of energy used, stored, and produced with your solar panels. There's also a demand charge on a lot of people's bills now. So a demand charge is basically where your energy retailer will measure your peak demand in a billing period, and let's say that's 10 kilowatts. They'll then duplicate that 10 kilowatt charge across each day of the billing period times by the rate of the demand, which is a cents per kilowatt value, and then that rate makes it a peak demand. That's hard to lower just with solar, but with battery you can decrease that as well. So your tariffs make a big difference. Another really big one is how you use energy. Everybody uses energy really differently. For some people are going to get better savings with solar and battery than others based on how they use energy. So sitting down and having to think about how you use energy, what time of day you use energy, that's going to be really important when calculating your ROI. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we go through the formula. The battery size obviously is going to make a big difference. The solar panel array size that you can fit on your roof will make a big difference. The weather and the location is going to make a really big difference. So if you're in Tasmania, you're not going to get as much sunshine as you would in Darwin. They're obviously two extreme examples, but there's differences in weather patterns across Australia. It's a really big country, and where you are makes a big difference to your solar and battery return on investment. I think that probably covers most of the factors, the major factors that can change the return on investment. Obviously the cost of the system has to be factored in as well, and that's really, I guess, your last major variable when you're looking at trying to calculate. So we're going to do two different ROI formulas. One, if you haven't got anything installed, so no solar panels, no battery. Secondly, we'll do if you've got solar panels installed already and you're adding a battery. So firstly, nothing installed. So let's say I'm going to keep these figures really, really round just to grey out how you can start to calculate things. Let's say you use 40 kilowatt hours of energy over every 24-hour period. You can look at that on your power bill, and if you're trying to calculate your ROI, you want to work on averages. So if you look, most power bills have a little bar chart somewhere that gives you a few months up to a year sometimes of breakdown of how much energy you're using. Sometimes that does give you it as an average on a daily basis. Sometimes it gives you totals, but really you want to try and work out what your average is. That's going to be the easiest way. Averages for production of your solar system and averages of how much energy you're using. Let's say you're using 40 kilowatt hours every 24 hours, which is a reasonably high use home. Now you're going to want to calculate what your solar system is going to produce. So let's say you install a 10 kilowatt solar system, and let's say for round numbers, you're going to produce 40 kilowatt hours of solar energy every day. Really, it's going to be a little bit more than that with a 10 kilowatt system in most areas, and a little bit less than that in some other areas, depending on obviously the geographical location, the angle of the roof, and a few other things like that. But for the sake of round numbers, you're going to produce 40 kilowatt hours every day with your 10 kilowatt solar system. Now let's say you're installing a 20 kilowatt hour battery. So we've got 40 kilowatt hours of daily use, 40 kilowatt hours of solar production, and a 20 kilowatt hour battery. And for this purpose of this video, it's 20 kilowatt hours of usable energy. Okay, so to calculate your return on investment, the first thing you're going to want to do is try and figure out where you're using that 40 kilowatt hours. Solar energy works when the sun's shining, but the bulk of your energy is going to be produced between 8 and 4. In the winter, obviously it starts up later and finishes up earlier. In the summer, you widen that window, but typically 8 till 4 is when you're going to produce most of your energy. The more of that 40 kilowatt hours that you can push into that window, the better, because that's when your sun's shining, that's when your solar's working. So let's say you can figure out that you can push 50% of your energy use into that window and utilize 50% of the solar energy. That means obviously that you're going to be using 20 kilowatts of your solar energy is going to be servicing your load. That leaves 20 kilowatt hours of spare energy, which you can then push into your battery, which is a 20 kilowatt hour battery, and therefore you're utilizing the full amount. That would mean under those circumstances, you would take the full 40 kilowatt hours of solar production, 50% would be used in your home, and 50% would be stored in the battery and then used overnight and through till the morning when the solar works again. So to calculate your return on investment on that period, you would then do 40 kilowatt hours times by whatever your kilowatt hour charge is on your bill would give you your basic return on investment on a daily basis. Just to be clear, I understand that that is not a reality. Those figures are never going to be accurate. They're just round numbers to let you know how to do the formula. In the real world, you're never going to have 100% utilization. So you're going to have a think there about how much energy you think you can push into the window of solar energy as a percentage on your average daily, and then how much is outside of that window. Usually you're going to end up with a number there that you're still going to have to potentially purchase from the grid, or maybe you've oversized and you've got extra solar energy that is then going to be exported to the grid still after your battery's full. So please don't take those as matter of fact. I'm just giving you a really easy way to look at it. So once you work out your own numbers, you'll be able to figure out how much of it you're going to utilize and then how much solar energy is left. If there's leftover power during the day and it goes back to the grid, you'll have to find out what your feed-in tariff is going to be. That means how much energy you're going to get for what's sold back into the grid. So the excess energy would then be multiplied by the feed-in tariff. So let's say you're getting 10 cents as a feed-in tariff, then you would times the excess energy amount by 10 cents to get your feed-in credit number, and the utilized amount from your solar panels used in the home and used in the battery, obviously at that higher number of what you're being charged. 10 cents is pretty high. There's not many people left on that, but again, just for the purpose of the video, I'm using round numbers. So you'd want to find out what your actual feed-in tariff is so you can do that part of the calculation yourself. If this sounds pretty complicated, that's because it is. That's why we have software that can do this job for you, and consultants that are really experienced in asking the right questions to do the formula and get you really accurate return on investment figures. So have a go yourself, but if you want us to give you a proposal that shows you exactly what we think you're going to save, then obviously get in touch and we can do that for you free of charge. I think that covers off the ROI formula for the full system. Obviously, if you've got a demand charge, you need to consider that as well. On your bill, it usually tells you when that demand is and how high it is. If you've got, say you're installing a 10 kilowatt inverter and your demand is under 10 kilowatts, that means that your solar and battery can technically supply that whole demand. You've just got to figure out whether you think you're going to have that in there, stored in the battery or coming from the sun at the time that you're using the most energy to cover it. Lastly, before I move on, you have to consider what we're talking about here is averages. There's going to be some days where you're producing a lot less energy from your solar panels and some days in the summer where you're producing a lot more. So this is just to give you a rough guide. Obviously, there's so many variables here, which again is why we have the software and the consultants to help guide you through this. But there's so many variables there. Some days you're going to have way more excess energy than you need and your battery's going to be full and you're going to be exporting. Other days you're not going to have anywhere near enough. That's where a VPP comes in handy, and we'll talk about that before we end the video. If you've already got solar panels installed, then the calculation can be done a little bit differently. We can then, hopefully if you've got it online, that's the best way, we can have a look at your monitoring app and we can see exactly how much energy your solar system is producing. If you've got a consumption meter installed, we can also see exactly how much energy you're exporting to the grid. So we now know, based on your monitoring, how you use energy and how you sell it back to the grid and how your solar system behaves. That obviously gives us great data to be a little bit more accurate. If you've had that system installed for a few years, even better, so we can then see exactly how it behaves through the seasons, and we can basically apply the same formula as I discussed before, but now we have the figures. Now all you're factoring in is the battery, so we can see how much you can charge and discharge your battery and calculate it a little bit more accurately. The last thing to consider when you're calculating that repayment, that payback period, is the cost of your solar and battery system. Let's say, for the sake of a round number, your solar and battery setup is going to cost you $15,000. Let's say that you've calculated it's going to save you about $3,000 a year. That then gives you basically a 5-year payback. But if you did want to factor in cost increases, it might shorten that a bit. So your energy costs might go up by 5-10% a year, whatever you think is a fair number to include there. And if you wanted to factor that in, it usually brings the return on investment down a little bit. Depending on where you live, energy costs some years have stayed pretty similar. Other years I've known them to go up by more than 20%. So I think if you factored in a 5% increase per year, that would be pretty fair and reasonable to calculate a good return on investment. If you've worked out that your system's going to cost more and your savings are less, then you need to calculate that obviously differently. But under that basic calculation, that's your payback period. So the VPP makes it more complicated. A VPP, for those who don't know, is a virtual power plant. We've got videos explaining what a VPP is. The most popular one at the time of recording is Amber Electric. That's who I'm with. There's a couple of videos on our YouTube channel answering all the frequently asked questions and explaining, not only there's one that says what a VPP is, but then an Amber specific as well. So I won't go into too much detail there. Essentially, it lets you trade energy with the grid. It makes the ROI calculation a little bit more complex, because what happens there is your battery will charge and discharge when it's more valuable to you. So if it's more valuable to discharge energy at 6 o'clock in the evening, which it usually is, or 7 or 8 p.m. in the evening when everyone's using power, the algorithm within the VPP will know to discharge as much of your battery into the grid at that point, earning you the most money back. You will want to cover yourself for those periods as well, so your battery would want to retain as much energy as is needed to get you through that peak period, but it's the excess that can go back into the grid. Daytime rates with Amber Electric are very, very low, so you would then obviously be able to charge your battery for really low rates. It's really difficult, to be honest, to calculate that manually yourself. We can help with that, but there is an additional benefit. So if you joined a VPP like Amber, you would know roughly what your battery savings were going to be based on the previous calculations. You would add value by joining Amber, and you'd get a quicker payback period. I'm going to put a link in the notes for the video to the Amber Electric ROI calculator, where you can type in the cost of your solar and battery system, the details of how you're using energy, and it will give you a payback period on there. It's a very cool tool. You can then try different battery sizes, as long as you've got the quotations listing the prices obviously that you need to input, and it will give you payback periods for different purchases. You'll find that the bigger the battery with a VPP like that, the quicker the payback, even though it costs more. That's because you can discharge energy back into the grid, usually faster with a bigger inverter, but also just as you've got a bigger battery to dispatch more energy. So if you've got a really big battery, you'd have the biggest inverter that you're allowed to install. You can discharge it at the maximum rate at the best times. So the bigger the battery, the more revenue you can generate with that VPP, meaning a quicker payback period. Because the battery rebate is more with bigger batteries as well, the cost to install a bigger battery per kilowatt hour installed is way less than a smaller battery. So it can still be not quite double, but not too far away from twice as much per kilowatt hour on a really small battery, a 5 or 8 kilowatt hour battery versus installing a 50 kilowatt hour battery. It can be pretty close to double the cost per kilowatt hour to install. So your return on investment with a bigger battery with a VPP is always going to be significantly improved. Hopefully this has been helpful. As I say, it's not an easy calculation to do. That's why we have consultants that are experienced in doing these calculations, and we have software on hand to help us do that. If you want to get in touch, please do. We can do these for you completely free of charge. And if not, drop some questions in the comments if you have any, and I'll be happy to do my best to answer them, and if we can be helpful. Yeah, anything else that you'd like to get in touch with, please do. Thank you.